So I'm a native Montanan. I got my bachelor's degree from MSU in electrical engineering. Went to work for Hewlett Packard in Colorado for 8 years as a design engineer, and then chipped away at my master's and PhD down there at the University of Colorado. Came back to MSU and joined the faculty in 2006. So I've been here for 17 years, and my research expertise is in the area of computer engineering. So I've been developing computer technology for aerospace applications the whole time I've been here. And that has kind of led in the past couple of years to trying to spin that out into a startup and try to commercialize that technology in my lab.
Okay. So I'm from Europe, which means I have a background in electrical and computer engineering from the Technical University of Dresden in Germany. And then after my undergraduate, I moved to Switzerland. I did my PhD at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, so short for EPFL, which is kind of like the MIT in Europe. Or this is how they like to refer to it. And then afterwards, for the postdoc, I moved to UCLA, worked in the bioengineering department as a postdoc, and then finally got hired in 2016 here at Montana State University.
I'm Sam. Let's see, so we're starting with the full life story. So I was born in Colorado and moved to Bozeman in 2009, Bridger Bowl University. So I was on the 5-year track here, but I did 2 undergrad degrees. The first one was in cell biology and neuroscience. The second one was in ecology and evolution. Yeah, let's see. So after that, I bummed around. I've done pretty much everything there is to do in Bozeman, from washing dishes to ski bumming to working at the university. But yeah, as it pertains, I guess, to why I'm sitting up here, which, you know, certainly feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, but there's graduating from MSU, entering the workforce in Bozeman, it became super apparent that housing is a critical shortage for us. So after a stint of managing a nonprofit here in town, I set out with a business partner, Hannah Van Wetter, and myself to create a business that, you know, I'll probably get to talk about a little bit more, but we prefabricate high performance homes out of a shop in Butte. So we're building, these little houses to go all around the state, all around the region. And, I guess, let's see, my best ties to Norm Asbjornson would be the venture competition, which I think Brock won the same year. So we were on the counterparts. Brock won the venture side, and then we were on the social side. So yeah, thanks for having us, Christina.
Okay, so my next question, go ahead and keep the mic, and we'll just pass it back the other way. So we'll start with Sam this time. But now tell us more about your business. So we might have gotten a few brief details, but tell us how your business got started, more about what the company does, and if there are any exciting plans underway right now, what those are.
Yeah, sure thing. So Bozeman has a housing shortage, right? Like if that's news to anyone in the room, let me know. We'll go grab a beer at Specs afterwards and do remedial housing policy 101. Somewhere on the order of 6,000 units, that was the last number that I saw published. It's a deeply complicated issue, right? Affordable housing, they call it a wicked problem, but really at the core of it, there's a huge supply side gap. So we're looking at, there's not too many ways to create affordable housing. Arguably the best way to do that is to build housing or buy affordable housing 30 years ago. The next way to do it is to subsidize it, right? Which is tremendously difficult. If you've been following what's going on with the state legislature in Helena, even when the state has a couple $2 billion of extra revenue kicking around, the prospect of public funding for housing is an uphill battle. And the final way to get more affordable housing is to build it yourself. So in sort of standard Montana cowboy methods, that's exactly what we're doing, is trying to build it ourselves. We've got a factory. So to talk a little bit about our business. So Foothold is a public benefit corporation. We were founded 2 years ago. So we're a Delaware C Corp in structure, but the public benefit designation allows us to balance mission with shareholder alignment. So I think at the end of April will be 2 years officially incorporated. But in that 2 years, we have taken this idea from, how do we build a better house in Montana? How do we take care of the people who are building those houses? And how do we deliver it on time and on budget in a way that makes the customer really happy? And we've taken that idea from literally just a harebrained, okay, so if any of you guys have ever built a house before, it's not that pleasant, it's a fun thing to do every now and then, but especially outside, right? Nobody wants to, it's very difficult to build in Montana, especially, seasonality. You're competing with folks like, I don't know, whatever, John Mayer, whoever's up the hill in the Yellowstone Club. So it's a very different environment, difficult environment to build quality and affordable housing in. So my business partner, Hannah, and I set about this idea of, let's try to advance the methods of construction and build a better kind of housing in Montana. That was in early 2020. We took, so right as the pandemic was crashing in, no exaggeration, 3 to 5 meetings a day, 5 days a week for 45 weeks or something like that, and well over 500 Zoom meetings. This was, Hannah's background's in construction. I had never built, I couldn't tell you which end of the hammer to hold on to 2 years ago, but over the course of that learning time, we put this idea together and then proceeded to, like I said, we got into the venture competition, won that, and that sort of kickstarted a pretty fun endeavor of seeing this thing through. So we did a small capital raise, and yeah, here we are about a year into full production. So we have a 9,000 square foot facility in view. We've got 15 employees, and we've got 10 houses set in the ground. People are living in full time this last year. We've got some really cool, so yeah, we prefabricate entire either halves or thirds of houses in the shop. They're built, all the way from start to finish by our carpenters in the facility, and then we set them on a truck, drive them within a 250-mile radius, so Bozeman, Missoula, Kalispell, Jackson Hole, with a 90-ton crane. We then pick them up and set them on the foundation. So it's quite a sight to behold. I wish I could, show some pictures or something, but my hand gestures and clunky description will have to do for now. And yeah, I think, I think the last part of the question was what's exciting or what's coming up. So, thinking in terms of now that we've got our proof of concept under our belt, it's just, what does the future hold? And really some awesome discussions across the region are happening with folks who, housing is of importance to beyond just the immediate need, right, of a roof over your head, but organizations, large entities, schools and universities and hospitals, all the way to nonprofit developers, people who are thinking creatively about how do we create housing, because it's not just Bozeman, it is all across the board. Tribal housing as well. So yeah, we've got some really interesting ideas to think about, not just the house as the product that we're working on, but the actual factory, the assembly line, and the technology and the methods behind that, thinking about expanding. So yeah, I'll stay quiet for a little longer.
Okay, cool. That sounds really exciting. Okay, I will tell you a little bit very different from houses. So let me start with just a brief introduction into the research I'm actually doing here at MSU. So I'm using micro nanotechnology to study brain cell behavior. And the reason why we are doing this is sometimes when people get depression, pharmaceutical approaches don't work very well anymore, which means an alternative approach is using actually electrical currents or electrical fields for stimulation get rid of the side effects of depression. Now, the problem with electrical currents or fields is that you kind of apply this to a relatively large area of tissue. So we came up in my lab with a concept where we're using now nanoparticles. They are magnetic and magnetic field gradients, so also an electrical engineering concept, but just focusing on the magnetic gradient side to mechanically stimulate those cells. And why is this of advantage? It has this big advantage that you can kind of very specifically target those nanoparticles to the cell membrane or even go inside the cell. And when you're then inside the cells, you can actually couple those nanoparticles to proteins, or you can sugarcoat them with DNA and do actually gene editing with those neurons. And this is on the research side, but during working with undergraduates and graduate students in the lab, we always have to develop tools, research tools, to kind of make our research more reliable, more reproducible. And when we're then going on conferences and presenting and talking about our research, we are often getting this question like, well, is there a way that we can actually use your tools? And this is where this idea of putting a technology which was developed originally just for research questions got put out there and into the market. Of course, the research tool itself was not very sexy, so we kind of had to go back to the drawing board and make it more into a product. And this is where the whole venture idea kind of started out. So so we're using one particular research tool from the lab, putting it into a tool which can be sold. And then this was the foundation of founding NanoMagnetic Solutions. The nice thing is this tool can really be applied not only to brain cells, it can also be applied to bone tissues, heart tissues, or other materials, even bacteria. So we're really hoping that in the long future, more and more researchers are going to adapt this into their workflow and into their experiments as well. So what is on the horizon? We're trying to get this company off by itself, transferring the technology and getting funding.
Yeah, cool. So resilient computing is, it's a spin out of MSU, similar to Anja's technology. So my research is in building computers that can operate in space. And so when you take a computer and you put it into outer space, it gets hit with radiation and it crashes. So NASA's devised ways to make computers work in outer space, but it makes them very expensive and slow. So the computers on Mars Perseverance are $200,000 a piece, okay? So there's a big push to try to figure out how can you put like regular, computers into outer space. And so my lab came up with a way to do that, and we called it RAD PC because it's a PC that can withstand radiation. And I started receiving grant money from NASA, many years ago, almost 2 decades ago, to mature and to try to show that this worked. So we started flying it on balloons and sounding rockets, and we went to the space station 3 times. We have one up there right now. We've done satellites. And in 2024, we're going to go to the surface of the moon. So this is MSU's kind of marquee research project, in my opinion. Along the way, we always talk to a bunch of companies that were like, man, this is so cool. I can't believe how awesome this is. And they would always want to talk about licensing the computer technology. And then we would meet with them and we'd show them what we had. And the problem was that we had a prototype that was basically held together with duct tape and bubble gum. And anytime anybody wanted to change the software, my graduate students would have to tear the whole thing apart, change the software, and then put it back together. And so the companies that were interested in this were like, maybe we'll come back in a couple of years after you have matured it a little bit. So I actually worked with the tech transfer office, and they recommended, hey, why don't you just start a company, spin this out, and get it a little bit further along, because it's never going to happen in the research lab at MSU, because you're always going to go to the next flight. It's like after the moon, then you're going to build the next prototype. So I started this company to spin out this specific technology with the goal of getting it just matured a little bit more so that other bigger companies could be like, oh, maybe I will purchase this or license the technology. And so that was the beginning of resilient computing. And so since then, I've gone after some, small business grants, and we can talk about that in the next question. But in terms of the exciting thing that's happening, we're going to the moon, right? We're gonna have a Montana computer on the surface of the moon in 2024. And this is it's very in the front of my mind that when this computer reaches the surface of the moon, it is going to be one of maybe a handful of computers that are operational today that are operating on the moon. There should be a business that is ready to sell that thing on day one, because it's going to be this huge publicity push and people are going to be like, where do you get this rad PC? And so what I am really shooting for is to try to have computers in boxes ready to go when that thing launches and heads to the lunar surface in 2024, or have technology that can be licensed by then. It was actually supposed to launch in 2023, so I'm actually kind of relieved that it got pushed a little bit because it's given us more time. But that's kind of the big point that we're marching toward, is getting this computer in a commercial form when we actually get to the moon with the MSU computer.
So the next question I have is about funding. Have you raised investment capital or found grants or went on to fund your company? And if so, if you could tell us about that experience, and is there any advice that you have or any observations that you have for others in the room who might be following that same journey to raise funding? And this is for whomever has an answer.
Okay, I'll go first since I have the mic. One of the things I've learned over the last couple of years is that a university spin out company is a lot different than a true entrepreneur whose heart and soul is in it, and that's how you're paying your bills. So a spin out from a university, it's unique in that the professor's involved intimately. There's usually a graduate student that's going to take the reins and go, but the professor never really leaves the university. If our model at MSU is to have professors spend 20 years here, then invent something and leave, that's a horrible human resource model. So you're trying to figure out a way to move it out of the university lab, get it up and running, and then come back to your university life, even though you didn't really leave it to begin with. So what I did in terms of funding was I followed a very linear path that has been set up by other people, which involves things like getting approval from the Board of Regents to work outside of the university, licensing the technology out of my own lab, getting seed funding from our tech transfer office. And then I went after SBIR and STTR grants, which are small business innovative research and technology transfer grants. And this is every federal agency is mandated to spend 3% of their budget on small businesses. So I started going after those immediately, and I ended up winning one right away, which was really cool. And that allowed me to hire my PhD student part-time. And he actually we started the company and we started marching forward. And where that has gone in the past couple of years is we got a phase one. I thought, oh man, we won a pitch competition along with Sam. And I thought, man, this is so great. We're this wonder kid, right? It's like, we're going straight up. And we worked and it was awesome. And then we didn't get the phase two, and we were basically just out of money. And we had to kind of retreat back to MSU and figure out what we're going to do. So then we came back and said, well, let's give it a shot again. And we ended up winning an SBIR phase one and another STTR. So right now we're actually running 2 of those grants, and those 2 will then lead to phase 2 proposals. And where the phase 2 proposal is really critical is that's what moves the small business that spins out of a university from being part-time students in a coffee shop to full-time engineers. And that's like a pivot point, not pivot point, but it's an inflection point where you start really being able to see, is this going to go? And we have not gotten there yet, but we have used 3 SBIR, STTR grants, in addition to pitch competitions and in addition to state grants. So all of resilient computing has been funded right now by grants and pitch competitions, but that's gotten us 2 years of tech development. And it just feels like every day we're just this close to like launching off. So.
Okay, this is really impressive. We're not that far yet. So, in general, so our company kind of fits into the area of biotech, and in general, biotech has a much longer pre-seed period where things are in principle staying in the lab. We have been successful with MSU related venture competitions, so we participated in the 50K in 2020 and got second place there. We then also applied for internal MSU catalyst funds and have been very successful there with over 3 in total consecutively. And yeah, we're also kind of integrating a lot of undergraduates in our on the research side or on the developmental side, and have been participating in accelerators, and then even traveled once to Denver to kind of expand our network. So I call it the pre-seed stage because we're very dependent and tied to the university still. But this is where we're right now, and we're also looking forward. We have made connections already to NSF related SBIR. So there are those big differences, right? There are kind of like several agencies out there, and even though they all have like those SBIR, STTR mechanisms, they are all very different. Our research is most likely going to be funded by NIH or NSF, and again, those proposals are going to look like very different from what, for example, DoD would require. I think I'll leave it there for a moment.
So I think other than my, 15K or whatever it was from the venture competition and a couple of handfuls of small grants, I'm not the expert on that. So SBIR, SBTT, talk to these guys about. Our path was a little bit different. We went the route of financing Foothold with a pre-seed round, which was an equity round. So, right, in terms of starting a company and the many different ways to do it, the easiest way to get some cash in the door quickly is to sell part of your company. Of course, as a founder, that gets to be a little bit of a sticky proposition when you start thinking about this thing that you're pouring your heart and soul into. Suddenly somebody else owns a large percentage of it. So we actually went a slightly different route for our seed round funding. So we did 250K of pre-seed, and then we did 500K of seed round funding. We work off a model based heavily on a local outfit here called Home State Venture Partners, and they work with family-owned businesses and mission-aligned capital investors called revenue-based financing. So essentially it's a debt note and you pay it back as a percentage of some business metric. In our case, it's gross monthly receipts. And for us, that felt like a really nice way to balance the competing interests of retaining equity and then also investor returns. I think in retrospect, it's definitely an atypical route. There's a lot of things that are atypical about Foothold. First-time founders, risky business. There's a large graveyard of companies in the prefab space, and then also this sort of atypical funding mechanism, as opposed to something like a straight price round or an equity round, or even something maybe a little bit more fringe, but like a simple agreement for future equity. There's all these boilerplate things. You can go onto the Y Combinator website or YouTube and learn all about it. But so we went that route, and I think if anything, I'm really glad we did it 2 years ago instead of right now. Especially in the private side of things with interest rates, people are definitely a little cooler right now. I guess the final big piece to talk about is like institutional. So if you were to go to a bank, you could get a loan. There's a number of great tools. Prospera, as our local business outfit, can help facilitate SBA loans, that sort of thing. Great ideas, but a lot of times if you're a young founder or a first-time founder, or you've got maybe a little bit of a screwball idea, banks don't want to touch you with a 10-foot stick. So that was our experience. Anyway, I think what was the last piece? It's some advice for people going through that right now is get really good at your story. That doesn't, in my experience, I was never much of a grant writer at MSU, but I did go through a little bit of that. It doesn't matter if you're writing a grant, if you're at a pitch competition, if you're, shaking somebody's hand over at Bridge Brewing and, telling them your crazy idea, like you have to have a story. You have to be good at what you do. You have to have the fundamentals down. You have to, know what you're talking about. But really what it comes down to a lot of the times is telling something compelling that somebody believes in. And that's how you really set the hook, at least in my experience. So I think, that's my advice, I guess, take it for what it's worth. But yeah, it's like, is work on a story. Yeah, right.
So that's a good segue into my next question. You've all mentioned participating in the venture competition here at MSU. We have the 50K venture competition hosted by the JJABS College of Business and Entrepreneurship, and I believe it's actually growing to be a 75K venture competition.
Say more.
But please tell us about your experience pitching there, or if you've done any other pitch competitions. And again, do you have any other observations or advice for those who might be considering making a pitch this year?
Yeah, so I guess that I first became aware of the venture pitch competition through the Blackstone Launchpad, right? Like as a esteemed MSU alumni, we were paired with a business advisor through the Launchpad, which was excellent. You get on Zoom and have a once weekly meeting and you kind of run through your business plan and they give you some feedback and that sort of thing. But then it was like, hey, here's this thing coming up. I think you guys would be a good fit for it. You should do it. Submitted our application, got accepted. And I think in all of these things is like, yeah, you have to have the base level criteria, right? Like you have to have an idea, you have to have something, you have to have a way to make money, right? You have to have a widget or an app or whatever, a house or whatever it is. And it has to hold water, passes test, whatever your favorite metaphor is. But so, once you're in, we got paired with an advisor who's actually awesome. He's, MSU business faculty. And I think, in terms of rigor of the like elevator pitch, he was probably one of the most helpful people we had. Just going through the presentation, you have your slide deck and you have which is your pitch deck. That's sort of the tool that you get to gesture to, but really what it is, you've got 3 minutes, every single second in that counts, and every word that you say counts. So it's really going through with a fine-tooth comb and making sure that your story is cogent and it's relatable and it's compelling. So, I think we gave it our best shot and, paid off. I think it's really nice. It's great to get no strings attached cash. It's also, I think I'm excited to hear that it's going up because when I heard 50K competition, I was like, whoa, sweet. And then, first place prize was only $15,000. So yeah, MSU $15,000 venture prize doesn't have quite the same ring to it. But I think, it's so awesome that the university supports those kinds of things. And I think, it wasn't necessarily like a crucial step in Foothold's success, but what it really was is like a milestone to hit that is, it helps you believe in yourself and it helps other people believe in you. So I think, yeah, I would fully encourage anybody who's out there thinking about it to take a crack. And also, if you don't win or you don't get accepted, and I've done other competitions and things like that before, and gotten blown out of the water by a million other better ideas. It's not like any sort of gatekeeping thing. If you don't win, that doesn't mean your idea is bad or that you shouldn't pursue it. So.
So we have done very similar things, and we started up with the MSU Launchpad, and this was really our gateway to all the competitions, to actually understanding what a pitch deck is. Because as a faculty, this is not something you work on. You know your story, you know your research story, but you definitely do not know the business jargon. And how to kind of translate your research into a really nice business relevant story. So this was awesome, working with the Launchpad people and then getting exposed to all those competitions. We also started out with the 50K, as I mentioned already, and then what was also very helpful was the 406 Lab, where we, this was actually where we got tied to a mentor and then who ran with us over those pitch decks again and again, because in principle, every competition requires a different type of pitch deck. So you can always improve something, you can always add something, or you can sort things out. So none of those pitch decks are going to be the same from one competition to the others. I think this is a take-home message, right? So really continue working on it, even so if you have your slides together, like the next time you might just twist it slightly differently, or you might want to add something, or you might to improve your problem statement and go deeper in there. And any type of local competition, even then the hyper accelerator down the road was always kind of made in connection through the Launchpad. So reach out to them and then go from there.
Yeah, so we did the same, all three of us did the same pitch competition. Resilient Computing has done 2 pitch competitions, and my experience with them is they were extremely valuable. I'm also very grateful that MSU does this, because for one, it really makes you think about the story you're telling, but you have to tell a complete story. So as faculty, we're trained to write these 25-page proposals that just are like, oh my goodness. And you try to tell somebody that, and they're, try to pitch that to somebody and they're asleep immediately. So you have this very short amount of time where you're supposed to take this 25-page technical proposal, cram it into about 30 seconds, and then also throw in this business side of it, which we know nothing about, and then make this big story arc in it. And so it was just this awesome experience to try to come up with a message that was very complete about us. And so we participated in this pitch competition. We're fortunate enough to win, and that money was really important to us because that was like our first dollar. So that was like the first laptop was purchased. We got QuickBooks, and we were able to pay to get, become an LLC. So it was extremely valuable money because it's no strings attached. And then that set us up. I'm really grateful to MSU because then we participated in a NASA pitch competition within 6 months. And it was worth $90,000, and we won the thing, first place. And it was just unbelievable because that's on the order of magnitude of like a phase 1 SBIR. And it happened at the time where we had ended our phase 1 and weren't getting any new grants. So we were able to like keep our students employed part-time and make progress, but it was no strings attached. So we went from the grant monies you get for like SBIR and STTR, they're tied to deliverables. You have to do the research and do all these reports. But when you get no strings attached, we were able to kind of shift and be like, all right, let's focus on what it looks like to put something in a box and get it ready to ship to a customer. So we made progress on that front that we probably wouldn't have been able to do with just normal grant money. So it was an awesome experience.
Is there any other entrepreneurial support or any other resources that you've used in the community besides those mentioned so far in growing your businesses?
Yeah, there's a lot. It's unbelievable. MSU has a whole bunch of programs. The first one I got involved with was MTIP. And so that's Montana Innovative Partnership and Peterson. So that was like the first call that I made when I started creating this company. And what Ann does is she also has seed grants. So, small 2,000, and they're supposed to help you learn how to write small business grants. And so I engaged with her, and she put me in contact with all these trainers. And so I went through all these training webinars on like how to write a small business proposal, how to do a budget, how to calculate your overhead percentage. And that really helped me get to the point where I could put together a competitive small business proposal. And then, like Anja, we got accepted into Early Stage Montana, the Hyper Accelerator. And that was a week-long intensive, like boot camp of business and just how you fund startups, all the things that Sam was talking about that I'd never heard of, doing all these seed rounds and pre-seed rounds and coming up with your pitch and trying to figure out how you're going to finance it. And so we spent a week just sitting there thinking about not the technology, but the business side. And that was really a phenomenal experience for me.
Yeah, so Progress mentioned already many things, which we also utilized. I think something I just want to add over here is the network. There was a point, for example, where we really started reaching out to MSU alumni and asked them like, hey, how was it for you? In particular for those ones who were graduate students and then use technology and spend it out into their companies and are really successful now as entrepreneurs in the community. So we also spent a little time just meeting them and asking them for advice, like how can a graduate student, for example, do this, right? What is important? What needs for example, me as a professor, what type of environment do I need to provide that the students are taking on those very risky projects at the transition from the end of their graduate school into the workforce. So yeah, using the local network.
Yeah, second to all of that, I think the only other ones I would add, so, just like on the networking side, there's tons of resources for this. So PowerPoint's early stage, Montana High Tech Business Alliance, your local SBA office. So we've got Prospera here in Bozeman. There's Headwaters over in Butte. There, like every region has one of these. MSU, I think the only one I would add, I think it's still underway, but the undergraduate scholars program was a really cool way, micro grants to students who have ideas for, a research project or a community project. And all those kinds of things, right? It's just a relentless practice of improving your idea, improving what you want to do. And I think really the most valuable thing for us was mentorship. And, a lot of times you access that through your network. Like who would have guessed that there's a guy he actually has a house up in the North Fork of Flathead, a house off the grid cabin. He spends all summer up there. But he used to run a modular building factory in Elkhart County, Indiana. They did 1,000 units a year of housing. And I wouldn't have guessed that. I wouldn't have guessed in a million years that you would find somebody like that in Montana. Or, Sequoia Capital PM has a house in Bozeman, right? And that these people exist in the Montana ecosystem of business and entrepreneurship, and they want to there's nothing that delights them more than having somebody come to them with a cool idea and the gumption to make it work. So I think that would, that's my advice is be likable, be kind, be communicative, but also seek it out and don't be afraid to pester people, beat down doors, ask for copies, whatever it is. Because a lot of times, I've just been super impressed at what you can find even in the backwoods here of Montana.
I'm wondering if you can tell us about developing your intellectual property and any steps that you've taken to license or protect that.
Yeah, I feel like I should just hand the microphone down the table. We actually take somewhat of a different approach to the idea of IP. So from my perspective, right, Foothold right now is building these small houses ranging in size from 400 to 1,200 square feet, 1-bed studios, all the way up to 2-bed, 2-bath configurations. A lot of what we do is non-proprietary. And if anything, I'm actually very interested in the idea of open sourcing a lot of our methods, some of which are proprietary. I mean, we've gotten quite into, on the building science side of things, everything from, living building and passive house certification all the way up through LEED. So we are some of the only people doing what we're doing, at least in North America. In my personal feeling, if there were 5 other companies that started in Gallatin Valley doing exactly what we're doing, even still, that wouldn't get close to meeting the housing need. So, it's a very different idea, very different project. I'm also not necessarily motivated strictly by the idea of massive wealth. So I think, from our perspective, it's actually a very different idea in terms of like, how do we do something that's a little more mission driven and how do we get more of that happening? How do we build more houses that are net zero energy? How do we build more houses that MSU, non-tenured faculty can afford? How do we, or the folks who are teaching our kids in school or the nurses at our hospitals? So I think, yeah, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, when you work at MSU as a faculty, as a graduate student, technology is owned by MSU, which means we license everything through the tech transfer office. This is one of the recommendations, for example, I personally got when I started here as an assistant professor, built up a really good relationship to the tech transfer officer early on. So yeah, have a meeting with them, tell them what your research is, what your technology is, have those regular conversations, what you're doing in the lab, and then automatically they kind of will advise you on what parts can be put, for example, into a provisional patent, and which parts, for example, are just like open source or for everybody in the community. And then through this trajectory, they will take care of it. They have their own patent officers. They do the paperwork. You just, in principle, have to work with them and provide the materials. So right now, all the time when we're going on conferences or have a publication, we're submitting our materials and we're refiling our provisional patents of this technology again and again. Once it then comes to the to spinning it out, right, there things are getting a little bit more complicated. So there you need to have ideally another lawyer involved who kind of does the paperwork and does the negotiation with MSU regarding the spin out or regarding the technology transfer. There are many different contracts out there. There are many different ways to do this. Sometimes when you, for example, collaborated on a grant with another institution, then maybe the other institution has also some interest in the technology. So yeah, things can get really complicated there. But there's help out there, and you just need to communicate. And the rest is not.
So resilient computing is a similar story. We are an MSU spin out. So we have licenses for the technology, the space computing technology, and also another type of technology from MSU. So when I started resilient computing, I turned around, it was the first time I've ever done this in 15 years. I wrote a check to MSU in order to get the license. So that's kind of a bizarre thing. And the way it works is that MSU holds the license for the version of the technology at the point it was transferred. And the way it's been explained to me is as the years go by and the technology morphs into something new, then I just get a hold of the tech transfer office and say, is this still MSU's or is it new enough that it's not MSU's? And we just kind of make a judgment call at that point. I will mention something that's kind of interesting. If you're going after small business grants, there is a thing called TABA that is really cool. It's called Technical and Business Assistance. And it's an add-on that you can put onto an SBIR grant, and you can do it at phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, you can add $6,500, and you basically get money to hire a consultant that'll help you with things like, set up your accounting system and market research and help you just the business side of things. But when you get to phase 2, it's $50K, and you can use some of that TABA to do IP protection. So the proposals that we have written had TABA in it, and half of it was going to go toward hiring lawyers to help file the patent. And it turns out that it would have actually filed a patent for MSU. So resilient computing would have paid for MSU's lawyers to get the patent, but we still have an exclusive license to that patented technology if it would have hit. And that is actually very valuable IP. Sometimes not owning the patent isn't a bad thing, because if you have an exclusive license to something where there's a patent within MSU and MSU takes on the patent infringement, that is an extremely valuable part of your company. And so just something to keep in mind is that whenever you submit an SBIR grant, make sure to check that TABA box and get that dollop of money on top of it, because it becomes very critical in phase 2.
I'm learning a lot today about the audience. So, okay, this question is kind of where do you even begin as an entrepreneur? But what challenges have you faced, and how did you solve them? So maybe pick a few, or pick the ones that you're thinking about today. But what are some of the challenges that you've overcome in building your businesses?
Well, this is a university spin out answer, so it's a lot different than somebody who has to pay their rent with this money. Is the challenge for me as a professor is how long do I keep doing this when it hasn't taken off to the point where I have full-time employees before I just quit? Because I've been doing this, it's been 2.5 years of paying students part-time labor and working out of coffee shops. And I still have a full-time job at MSU. It's like, this isn't my day job. This is nights and weekends. And it's getting a little exhausting. And so I'm wondering, like, how long can I do this before I just say, all right, that was let's close that chapter of my life. And so that's the challenge that I face every day, of how long I go before it, hits that inflection point and goes up to full-time employees. And I would say I face that every single day when I get out of bed and decide what I'm actually going to work on. So.
Okay, so in my startup, as I mentioned, we started actually out with a capstone team, which is a team of undergraduate students here at MSU. And capstone is something which happens in the last year of their academic undergraduate trajectory, which means, and this is the biggest challenge, they are graduating and they're leaving. So kind of really keeping this whole venture idea or entrepreneurship team going, even though the students are leaving and taking on jobs. We had, for example, one student who got accepted into a graduate program, but then at this new place, he was not having a PI who was supportive of the whole entrepreneurship idea. So his new PI completely shut down working with us and collaborating with us and having this, for example, on the side. So kind of thinking about like, or doing long-term planning and always thinking about, okay, which, for example, could be part of the team and keep this going over a longer trajectory versus which one can you bring in, for example, for short-term skill set you need or for short-term problem you have to solve, and then also releasing them once they're ready to move on with some other projects. This is, I think, the biggest challenge, and the way how we solved it is just being very upfront when we're involving those students that we provide certain flexibility, but we also have certain expectations, and not kind of committing too early and too much is, I think, a good advice here all the way. So.
Yeah, gosh, it is a hard question to answer. And maybe that just means I'm not very good at my job, because it seems like every day is nothing but solving problems. But I would say like that is also part of the magic of the entrepreneurial endeavor, is that you get to wake up and, figure out which of the problems you want to choose to tackle that day or work on. I think, maybe to take a slightly different route, like a really interesting one to talk about, and I don't know, we can maybe get into this a little bit later too, but is like the mental strain of starting and running a business. And I'm sure you guys are feeling it too, as you have, whether it's PhD students, trying to make a living in Bozeman, working towards a dissertation, also trying to start a business. It's just demanding. Like there's a lot on a daily, and then when you start having to pay rent, when you start having, like, we've got employees now who are having kids and buying their own houses, and that's a whole different level of responsibility and a need to sort of make it work. It's no longer like my funny little science experiment in the basement. Like, it's now a real thing. And so I think that's, and it's just something in the sort of entrepreneurial discourse, at least as far as I've participated in it, there's a lot of celebration for people who are like making it, grinding away and crushing and getting their business off the ground and succeeding, and that's really cool. But then there's also on the the flip side of that coin is a very real tax on oftentimes it's well-being, right? And it's like you're not getting to do the things that fill your cup because you're too worried about your HR problem or where the next grant's going to come from or whatever those things are. The million different fires that happen on a daily basis. So I think, yeah, that, you know, this is just, maybe it's just what's on the top of my mind today, but yeah, we can get into that more too.
So my next question is, have there been any changes or trends, and certainly the last few years societally are filled with changes for all of us, but you know, from a business standpoint, have you either had to adapt to things that have changed or had to make a significant pivot in your business as you got into it and things turned out to not be what you thought in your initial model?
Yeah, I mean, I guess sort of like the problem question, it's just been nonstop. You know, the world is shifting under all of our feet. I think on one hand, that actually makes for a really cool environment. You know, the birdcage has been sort of rattled globally, and that's a really interesting environment for starting a business and for first-time entrepreneurs because everybody's on uneven footing. So I think, you know, from everything in, you know, our business of building houses, right? We have a bill of materials that's 30,000 line items in a spreadsheet, and you know, it's counting individual screws as individual items, right? It's not that complicated, but you know, each of those items has a supply chain that you can trace back, you know, several times over. So, you know, supply chain disruptions has been a major one for us. Cost of capital is another one right now that's really up in the air. So folks who are looking to take on money to advance an idea are you know, having a harder time doing that right now than maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So I don't know that I necessarily have any answers to any of those questions, but we've definitely been on our toes from day one dealing with that. And I think, you know, I really just take the critical mindset of like what's a true threat, to look at like a SWOT analysis, what's something that you really need to address immediately. Because oftentimes there's a long list of those things. And so, you know, deal with your threats first and then work your way towards opportunities. And yeah, I don't know that I have any more wisdom on it, but it's an interesting time right now for sure.
Okay, I think one challenge we're facing on this particular site is like technology itself is evolving very, very fast. So you think like you have found a solution to a particular problem. In our case, for example, we thought like, oh yeah, we have this tool and now we're just putting it out to make money. That's not quite how it works. There's relatively quickly a customer saying or telling you like, oh, can you also do this? Can you also do that? And for us, it actually turned out that there's a huge interest in incorporating artificial intelligence, and there's also a huge interest in kind of having, for example, a software component. Now, this was not the original idea what we were having. We were just thinking, yeah, putting out like a hardware toolbox. So this is something we're kind of exploring right now, and yeah, and just I think trying to be open to those demands.
So maybe if there are colleagues in computer science here today, yeah, have a kind of water cooler conversation.
Absolutely, yeah, come to us.
Doctor,
yeah, we love to integrate you.
Right?
Yeah, so again, we're pre-revenue, so I don't know if I used the word pivot correctly, but when I started Resilient Computing, it was, I wanted to be the space computer person, right? It was fun, it's awesome, work for NASA, fly all this technology. And then what happened was, especially when I went to early stage Montana, realized that there's not that much money in building 2 or 3 space computers a year. So it's awesome and it's fun, but you're not going to have 20 employees doing that. And so the second license that we have from MSU was another idea, which was an extension of our space computer that could actually go in and make it malware resistant. And I thought it was cool. It was, you know, whizzy tech. And when I went through early stage Montana, everybody just jumped all over that idea and was like, you understand that this is bigger than the space stuff. And I said, no, I don't understand that. NASA's cool. And they're like, you don't understand. NASA is going to buy 2 computers a year. The computers that you sell that are malware resistant, there's billions of those sold a year. So you need to just drop the NASA stuff and go right for what they call critical infrastructure, which is the billions of little tiny computers that control the valves in water treatment plants and control the relays in the electrical power grid. And I had not even really thought about that. And so for the last year, I've been applying for grants in that area and trying to study that whole market. And so that pivot point was something interesting, but when you talk about the global, the global impact on this, on what we're doing, I was also not as aware of the global cybersecurity issues. I kind of didn't really want to know what was happening with respect to cybersecurity. Once you know, you don't ever sleep again. And it is terrifying to think about how many people are constantly attacking every single part of our society. Every computer you have is under constant attack. And so that's the biggest opportunity that has emerged for resilient computing as a result of going through early stage Montana and kind of the global state of affairs.
First question I have is like, do you see, besides you in the shop, you see the manufacturing and making of this stuff in Montana and Delta Valley?
For resilient computing, the way it would work is very similar to the model we use at Hewlett Packard in Colorado. You design everything here, but then printed circuit boards are fabricated somewhere else. They're assembled, parts are loaded somewhere else. You design mechanical enclosures, they're fabricated somewhere else. Everything ships back to Bozeman. You assemble it, test it, flash it with software in a box out the door. So that would be the manufacturing model that I would take with Resilient.
Okay, so for us, as we are having a very simple tool, and this absolutely can be fabricated over here. And then the software side, we're looking into automatically. I mean, you can do this all over the place, but yeah, the students or the people would also be here.
We're building in Montana.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the following question to that is the impact of the labor market. Housing shortage to that. Are we get to think about that?
All right.
I think the solution for the housing market sits next to us. So, and honestly, the idea to kind of do this whole entrepreneurship thing was, for example, to provide more tech related jobs here in Bozeman. So that, for example, a lot of our graduate students are not migrating out of Montana, but really find challenging and interesting jobs post their graduate degree and can actually stay here. So yeah, I hope that they all stay here.
Yeah, same thing. My hope is that the people I hire are high enough paid. Now that might be, I might be disillusioned, but I'm on grant money right now, so it's, I can dream.
Other questions? Yeah.
So you've got a product, a home, that's got to be permitted and put on a, hopefully, owner-owned lot. What would you, if you could change one thing in city regulations regarding entry of the product in the city of Bozeman, what would it be?
How much time you got?
I said what? I'll give you 3.
All right. So it's actually, Montana's probably one of the only states where we could have done what we did in terms of starting with we had an R&D budget of about $80,000, which in a prefabricated housing startup is it's universally almost considered impossible to do. That being said, there are a number of local regulations and difficulties. A lot of times, and this is where maybe it feels the funniest to be on the high tech business panel here is like it's actually profoundly low tech. So if there's one thing, and I think one of the questions somewhere in the agenda was like an opportunity. If I could change one thing, it would be the software platform that the city of Bozeman uses. It's hated across the board by everyone who uses it, both the general contractors, the project managers, architects, whoever's submitting for permits. It's despised by the entire city staff that uses it. And that goes from the administrators all the way to the plan reviewers. It's just regarded as super clunky. So, you know, for our computer science people over there wanting to build an app, you know, that's one of them. You know, there's let's see, and I get 3 right. So the next one would be to work with the city and have a pre-approval process for certain kinds of housing. The city is pretty resistant to that right now, and understandably, they have a major liability exposure in terms of inspecting and approving dwelling units. My wish with a pre-approval process would be to shorten timelines in the permitting stage, which, you know, oftentimes, whether it's an owner-occupied unit or an investment property, that time is the biggest compounding variable, especially with interest rates. So where we've seen building permit times for an accessory dwelling unit in someone's backyard range up to almost 8 months of back and forth with the city for the same exact project that, you know, we've had other permits take about a month and a half start to finish. That's one of the biggest risks. But really what it comes down to at the end of the day is just relationships. So I think that's, you know, my hope for the city. Up until very recently, they were operating about half of their staffing positions filled. I think to your question about the labor market and the housing shortage impacting people, I mean, one of the city's inspectors lives in Toston, drives into work, right? And so the city, when they have 8 building inspector seats and only 4 of them are filled, makes everybody's life miserable. So I think that, you know, whether it's a relational thing or a staffing issue or a salary issue, you know, I think the city owned land developed for city housing for city employees is a really interesting model. But I only get 3, so. Thanks for the question.
Any other questions? I have a question for the room, could be answered by the panel or others. Are there other things that folks are doing to help support entrepreneurship and technology transfer that might not have been mentioned today? We've had some great programs highlighted.
I can give a shout out to.
Yeah, okay, with my here.
One, I guess we have some representatives in the room, but the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center was huge for us. I mean, right, the idea of prefabricated housing is taking the manufacturing methods and applying them to construction. Construction across the board has the lowest productivity gains of any major industry going back for several dozen decades. So it's a remarkable thing to have the horsepower of the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center. We got state funding to work with them basically in the same way that with the venture competitions, you're appointed a sort of advisor. You know, we basically hired them on as consultants for lean manufacturing methods. That was super, super critical getting off the ground. So that's one of them.
Very good one to mention. Did you put a hand here?
I think they're in through Prospera, but there's opportunities for like military veterans. The Development Council Montana has this tied in, and also Women's Development Council, and that goes into like SBA, small business government contacts. We already set aside some grants, things like that, is up there for stuff. Money, workforce coming from the service.
Next question, again, for the panel or others in the room. What gaps or opportunities do you see that, if addressed, could help advance entrepreneurship in Montana?
You can take this one for that.
Yes, this is a really good question. I was waiting for it. So something we discovered, and this is kind of tied to the biotech area is we are in need of a relatively large amount of seed funds to really get it off and independent of the university. So we would just hope that there would be more high-risk investors here in the Valley, kind of working or jumping off into this tech area. And I think another one is also a lot of universities at the East and West Coast. They have built by now those huge incubator spaces where you can rent lab space. We do have models here on campus where we can work, for example, and rent lab space, for example, through the research development entity. However, then you're competing almost against your own lab space, what the faculties are kind of administering. So kind of having really those independent incubator spaces where, like, for example, a postdoc or a graduate student with an idea can kind of come in, maybe get some seed funding, and really pitching off technology or a tiny little idea. I think this would go a long way and really boost biotech entrepreneurship.
One in the back, Kenna.
I think Sarah mentioned a couple of things that investment innovatively, like more investors to not just trade equity, but really what is the founder and how is the founder going to as an investor, so more people approaching money and trading that previous places that I've lived at great places where you can get great access to Wi-Fi, you can get great access to like a professional. It's very it's kind of like a co-working space specifically like the stage so they have access to needs that another stage to live.
So I work with a lot of youth for the robotics programming, and I can see this as a long-term gesture, but including youth in the conversation and helping them to understand that entrepreneurship is a route and in somehow inviting them to these types of things and spaces such as your businesses that so they can have exposure.
Absolutely. And I want to underscore that the presence of the Blackstone Launchpad here at MSU and at the University of Montana has been game-changing in emphasizing entrepreneurship as a viable career path and something that's completely legitimate to think about and explore, and offering pathways for students who are studying any major on campus, not just business, to have an opportunity to refine pitches and business plans and explore that track. So that's a resource that didn't exist 10 years ago and that has been game-changing in the last number of years. And I also want to talk about the Youth Entrepreneurs Program through the Montana Chamber of Commerce, which is present. I think there are now hundreds of teachers in Montana who have access to that program and are teaching middle school and high school students entrepreneurship skills through hands-on activities. And then also they have a venture competition as well that's supported by MSU and a number of other businesses. So students in high school are able to pitch and start those businesses. And they're in actually many rural and tribal communities because they started in those places. So that's another wonderful program in Montana that's sprung up in the last probably 5 years. Other opportunities or gaps that you see that you may be experiencing?
I'll share a pet peeve I have at the federal level. I don't know how this changes, but right here, Congressman. SBIR grants are for small businesses, and small business is defined as 500 employees or less. So as a company that has no full-time employees, you're competing against companies that have 450 employees. And it's like, they're not gonna go out of business if they don't get that. But the funding, it would be great if we could target the federal funding at companies that are going from nothing to the 5 to 10 employees to get the idea off the ground, as opposed to making it an even playing field and review process for companies like Resilient Computing, who's in a coffee shop, versus some of these huge 400 employee companies. So I don't know how to change that, but it would be nice if some of that SBIR money was earmarked for the nothing to something crowd.
Anything else? Other questions? Okay, let me send this back to our panelists then in our last final 5 minutes. This is your opportunity. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about yet that you think might be important to mention, helpful to mention, something on your mind that you'd like to share to close?
You guys thought I had something to say or?
They want more time to think.
I got mine after that, Jeff.
No, I think really well covered. I would, I guess, going off of that last conversation, echo resources and support. And it's not accidental that it's difficult for the coffee shop and the garage type startup ideas to get money, because they are the riskiest endeavors, right? And so if you're an investor, your door is constantly being knocked on by people who have the next whatever the next best idea is. But yeah, creating and this is maybe my ecological background, I guess, going to a conversation I was having with Christina before this all started, but it is, thinking about small business and entrepreneurship from an ecosystem perspective, and what facilitates a healthy ecosystem. You have inputs, diversity, of course, is crucial, and I think having an understanding of what the future, what the vision is for Bozeman, for Gallatin Valley, for Montana as an entrepreneurial hub. It does feel like we're in a very interesting time. Maybe this is just my perspective, but in the sort of primordial soup of something really cool here. If you look at other places, right? So there are these advisor of ours calls them emerging tech hubs around the country. There's maybe a dozen of them, a couple dozen of them. Small, mid-sized cities, usually around 100,000 people, usually have a research institution close by. But especially with the demographic shifts that we've seen as a result of COVID and remote work, right? These suddenly are becoming very livable places, oftentimes a lower cost of living than a major coastal city. And so you're seeing people who have tech jobs from those coastal cities moving to towns like Bozeman, right? We've all felt that over the last 2 years. So I think capitalizing on that and continuing to foster discussions, continuing to, help people network. Workforce development is another one, in terms of partnerships, like we're working with Montana Tech over at Butte in workforce development on a fairly low tech level. But I think, things like practical experience for our college seniors in the room, capstone classes, those kinds of things to continue. Because as Brock, I'm sure you're not far away from hiring your first employees, but you want to know that those people are capable and well-trained and good folks. And so, I think that's a couple of thoughts on that, just because maybe, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but I'll finish with a note about housing too, right? Is so roughly like when you're thinking about job creation, any one new job created in most industries has about a 1-to-1, sometimes a 1-to-1.2 ratio of housing needs that come with that job. When you're talking about high tech jobs, so this is the remote workers, software engineers, high performing, high paying jobs coming into a community, that has about a 1-to-7 ratio of housing needs required. So I think as you're thinking about, and that's because each of those software engineers or whoever it is, right? Like say you're working for a FANG company and you move to Bozeman because you love skiing at Bridger Bowl. But then all of a sudden, you're getting your groceries delivered and you're having somebody come clean your house, right? It has a cascading effect on the local economy. It creates other jobs, but it also creates a real demand and an onus on, the community to support the infrastructure that's crucial for a vibrant community. Housing is a big part of that. So I think as we see, Bozeman grow and evolve through the standpoint, and I'm sure, we've got some really cool big names in the room, and like I saw on, LinkedIn or whatever, like there's, now a half dozen Google employees who are living in Bozeman. Like I wouldn't be surprised if we're, following in the footsteps of Bend or Boulder, Colorado, or things like that. We're not very far from, IBM type companies, Google type companies considering campuses here, and that kind of thing. I mean, Billings Clinic, right, is one stage of that. They moved to town and they have 200 units of housing that they need immediately. That is an exponential growth when you start looking at the other tech growth. I mean, on the small business side, it's maybe a little bit peas and carrots, but once you start getting into the bigger employers, it really has a ripple effect. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I guess you could have, it was okay to send me the microphone.
Great. Plus, I had not enough time to think about what I want to say. I think really keep doing what you're doing over here. We faculties from MSU, we can provide a really supportive environment in the lab, but it goes a certain way, but not the full way. So really continue doing those panels, continue doing all those supports, and really fostering an environment of entrepreneurship in the Valley. Just really finishing line.
One thing that I will add is that we have some tremendous partners in the Montana Bioscience Alliance and the Montana Bioscience Cluster Initiative. And we have partnered with them to have some specific content targeted toward bioscience, tech startups, and entrepreneurs and resources, because it really is a unique space with unique challenges. So we do have, if folks are in that space, content relevant to you specifically. Rob, take us home.
Last thing I'd say is just from a faculty perspective, I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of support there is. And it's almost a linear sequence of events where if you have something in your lab you want to spin out, you start at the tech transfer office, conflict of interest, 407 approval, licensing, you go to 406 labs, Blackstone, early stage Montana, and it's just like, it's ripe for a riveting pamphlet that walks a faculty from step one to the point where you've got a part-time PhD student on the verge of a full-time job. And so I think we need to document that. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us, for all of you in the room for bringing your good thoughts and questions as well.